I've known Karen since we were students. Karen was a year behind me in fine arts here at Mount Allison, and we didn't really know each other very well then. But as luck would have it, we both returned to Sackville in the fall of 2005, and we reintroduced ourselves really within days of arriving. Since then, I've had the chance to follow Karen's practice and see her work evolve. In many ways, it feels strange to stand here and introduce you to Karen. I'm sure most of you know Karen already, but then I thought about how Karen is a person who's full of surprises. She has a lot of secret skills. You might not know, you might, that she's a personal trainer. She is a downhill ski and snowboard instructor. She has a certificate in engine overhaul. She does. And anyone who attended her Make, Do, and Mend workshop here at the Owens, co-hosted with Gay Hansen, will know that she has mad skills for remaking and reinventing clothes. And while many of you have likely seen Karen's work in the biennial fine arts departmental exhibitions, in shows at Struts, in recent exhibitions with Thaddeus Halonia at Galerie 12 in Moncton, or even participated in her photomatic traveling tintype studio held at Thunder and Lightning this past spring, this is, in fact, Karen's first public artist talk in Sackville. Tonight's talk gives us the opportunity to see a bigger picture, to see bodies of work developed over the last almost 10 years and the threads that weave through her practice. Karen graduated with a Bachelor of Fine Arts from Mount Allison in 1999. She went on to complete a Bachelor of Education, Visual Arts Specialist from NSCAD University and Mount St. Vincent University, teaching primary and secondary visual arts before taking her current job at Mount Allison as technician and lecturer. In 2010, Karen completed a Master of Arts in Photography at the Edinburgh College of Art in Scotland. The recipient of several awards and grants for her work, Karen has exhibited in Canada, in the United States, the United Kingdom, and Iceland. In 2012, she took a private wet plate collodion tutorial at the Scully Osterman Studio in Rochester, New York, and this past summer was awarded a SIM artist residency in Reykjavik, Iceland. Karen's work is distinguished by a concern for place and the marks of time on the built environment. Often drawn to architecture, her images tell a human story of presence and absence. Alongside these key themes, Karen has a number of smaller and ongoing bodies of work that reflect her sense of humor and playfulness. She has a deep curiosity for the mechanics of photography. Never without a camera of some kind, she employs the very oldest and the very newest technologies: large format view camera, homemade pinhole cameras, plastic Holgas, and iPhone. Karen's approach to photography and her sense of exploration reach beyond her own practice to inform her teaching. Her passion for photography is infectious, and she brings this to bear on her teaching at Mount Allison as a local 4-H leader in photography and in the many Artist in Schools projects in which she has been involved. It is my pleasure to welcome Karen tonight.
Thanks, Lucy. So first, I'd like to just say thanks to Jemmy and the Owens Art Gallery for inviting me to come and speak to you tonight, and also to all of you for coming out on yet another fine spring day to come to my talk. So it is with great pleasure that I'm here this evening and talking to my community. So I thought that Lucy had mentioned that I would be looking at works that I've kind of been working on for the last about 10 years. So it's newer works. There's maybe a couple older ones thrown in the mix, but for the most part it will be within the last 10 years. Before I get into it, can everyone hear me okay? Yeah, okay, super. So I thought I'd start out with just kind of showing you a few images to give you insight as to how I work. So these are images that I kind of refer to as just habits of what I do. So ways of looking at my environment, ways of connecting with my surroundings. And I guess this image is here because it kind of goes back to being a student. And Thaddeus, who I guess most of you guys would know personally, if you've ever taken a photography course from Thaddeus, one of the main things that he drills into your head is that you should have a camera with you at all times. And that's something that always stuck with me. So by my door at my house, I have a lot of different cameras, and these are my go-to cameras. They're portable, they're light, and two of them are kind of reinvented and homemade, and then they're all very low technology, I guess we'll say. So not a lot of frills. And I really like that as just having something to go to in terms of recording and connecting with my surroundings. So living in Sackville, it's not a big town physically. I end up walking to work a lot of days. So I see the same thing over and over again. So with those cameras, they really kind of change the aesthetic of what it is that I'm looking at. And it becomes more of an emotional response for me, and kind of reinventing and representing to the viewer what it is that I'm looking at. So this is just my street, made with a pinhole camera. And these are all just from my street. So just kind of walking back and forth to work and home again and again. So I'm really interested in the everyday aesthetic and just kind of looking at my immediate surroundings and kind of attention to details that perhaps I feel are overlooked a lot. I get really excited about how things kind of come together within the picture frame. I really enjoy things like light, tone, texture, form, so a lot of formal qualities. But then if I just go back one, there's a kind of balance with working with the cameras that I showed you, and then other cameras that I'll get into a little bit later in terms of an approach. So it's not so much the tools, but it's more of an approach to how I make work. So I'm really drawn to the balance that I have with the kind of unpredictable. So this is the lines at the top are created by light leaks, and that kind of contrasted with a lot more control of the image, such as this one. So this is a much more finer optical device that I've used for this one. So all of these images, they've kind of ranged over the last 7 to 10 years, and they're in different places, but they're kind of what catch my eye when I'm experiencing a new place or re-experiencing something familiar. I'm really drawn to the idea of how you can include a certain amount of information, and then the rest kind of begins to offer up questions with the viewer. So what's just beyond the frame? What was here? So a lot of these are with cameras that are handheld, portable. And it's just a way of experiencing and connecting with my surroundings, as well as an awareness of my surroundings and environment. So here you can kind of maybe see the contrast if we think back to the first image that was a pinhole. This was taken with a large format view camera. So it has a lot of detail and fine detail that from a distance, you get a sense of a lot of tone, and even when you get close, the attention to detail and the detail that's present is still quite strong. Whereas the first pinhole image that I showed you, it kind of breaks down as you get in closer. So it's a much different emotional response in terms of looking at the two different ways of making the images. So and I get really excited by things like, when there's something like this image, I was really drawn to the symmetrical quality of the structure, and then just the shadow, so that element of light and reference to my surroundings and where I am in relation to my subject. And in addition, as I mentioned before, the kind of what's beyond the frame is really kind of interesting to me. So just kind of abstracting or just presenting little bits of an environment, abstracting from the larger picture, so that the viewer is left with kind of piecing things together, that there's always kind of a question of what it is and where it is. So my intention with that is that it kind of helps to create a narrative. And at this point, you may have noticed that all of the images so far are devoid of people. And that is something that I'm quite interested in terms of how the viewer responds to an image when there is no figure in the image. So for me, in terms of how I experience artwork, is that when there is no figure, that it allows me to have a direct relationship with that situation. When the figure is introduced, I begin to make connections and narratives based on that figure and their relationship with the space. So it's more about myself and my connection with that environment, and encouraging you as the viewer to begin to build your own connections to the environment. So, as Lucy had mentioned in her introduction, I'm really drawn to the idea of place. So I just pulled this quote out from The Lure of the Local by Lucy Lippard. Places have influenced my life as much as, perhaps more than people. I fall for or into places faster and less conditionally than I do for people. So that's something that really interests me, and it's not something that I try to do, it's just how I relate to whether it's something familiar or something new. And I'm really drawn to the place. I think that it's more in recent years, probably the last 3 or 4 years, that I've really come to the realization of maybe why that is. And basically, I grew up in Topsail, Newfoundland, and I find that a lot of my memories and my childhood experiences in Newfoundland have really influenced my work and heavily influenced what I do now. So for me, it's interesting kind of going back through the work, especially for the talk this evening and the last couple of years as well, just kind of pulling different ideas out and how that connection exists. So I spent a lot of time exploring the coast and, kind of, the woods. They're not really thick forests where I lived, so. And then just the kind of surroundings. So I go back to Newfoundland every year at least once, and each time I'm there, I make work. It's not a specific body of work, it's just more about revisiting a place and responding to it each time I'm there. And so each time I go, it changes in terms of what I'm drawn to. and the tools that I use to make the work vary depending on what I have with me. So this is, for those of you in second year who were in photo this morning, I promised that I would show you a slide that what happens when you don't wind your 120 film tight. There you go. So with a lot of these cameras that I use that are the smaller format, plastic, homemade, I'm really drawn to that aesthetic of the dreamlike quality, and kind of how, for me, it really communicates the idea of memories and kind of interruptions in viewing. So these are just images from familiar neighborhoods where I grew up, and things that kind of stand out. There's, for this one, I really enjoyed the cat looking at the matching garbage bin to the house. So, yeah. And the upside down sevens to make the ones. And so there's always like little things that I kind of find quirky and humorous that I'm really drawn to, and feel the need to respond to. So in terms of memory and kind of that idea of how my childhood has really kind of influenced what I do now, and the sense is, when I was going through images for this talk, I came across this one, and I can still remember the smell of the fresh bread. So, how your memories are triggered is of interest to me. So it's often when I'm traveling or when I'm looking at places that are even familiar, it's the idea that sometimes I'll just experience something that takes me back to my childhood, and it may not be something that is apparent at the time when I'm responding to it, but later when I'm looking through contact sheets or looking through the images, then I kind of start to make connections to my childhood in Newfoundland. So now this body of work, Disregard, is one of the larger bodies of work that I've completed, and it began when I was doing my master's in Edinburgh, and it continued till 2012. So it's about 50 images or works, and within that, so with the Disregard, I was very interested in the idea of history and responding to my environment and that idea of connection with place. So with that, I traveled around Scotland a fair bit to try and figure out where it was that I was interested in working. I knew I had kind of like a list of things that I wanted to be exploring, and some of those things were transition in the built environment, evidence of history, regeneration of the built environment, economic loss and social changes that have happened and how that's revealed, as well as kind of looking at the everyday and sense of place. So things that are kind of, common within all of my work. So each of these works were made with an 8x10 inch view camera. Up until this point, I worked primarily in black and white. And when I was working here, I began to work in color. The prints are larger format, 24 by 30 inches, and each image is named by the location. So for example, this is Corner and North Sea. So with this work, the idea of really kind of communicating the idea of a community, the three areas that I was working in were Leven, Methil, and Buckhaven, which are three communities in Fife on the east coast of Scotland. And just the idea of how history is revealed in the built environment is something that really interests me. So in this one, you can kind of see the layers of history that show kind of that regeneration of the space, you know, the new bricks added, the kind of plastering over, but then they're starting another series of it kind of falling apart again. So again, the idea of taking things and abstracting them from their environment so that all of these spaces are familiar, yet they're not specific to a location in the sense that you can kind of, for the most part, point out like that's such and such a building on the corner of, you know, these streets, that although they are specific to a location, that they're accessible to people who have never been there. So the kind of layering that not only happens physically in the buildings, but also in the way that the community or the built environment kind of comes together is interesting to me. When I was in Scotland and working in this area, the majority of the buildings were like the right-hand side of this image. So this is a cottage built in 1898, and it was, or is an area that is kind of, you know, quite rich in history. And within that area, most of the homes were just that kind of beige with brown. The usual variation was a lighter beige for trim. So, you know, and everything quite organized. So I was really drawn to this image here, this location, because of that contrast that exists and how personalities and how the community begins to be revealed within the built environment. So, you know, you have those stuffed toys jammed into that top window and the lavender and the purple trim. So just a very different kind of approach to how people present themselves, and also how it's accepted in the community. So I'll just tell you a really quick story about this one. The streets are quite narrow there, so, and I'm quite obvious with a large format camera. It takes a little while to get set up, so it's not like a quick photo and on my way. So, and I knew that the people were home, so I went to each side and asked if I could photograph their house. And the person on the left was a little bit hesitant until I said, and I love the color that you've painted your house. And then she was, you know, more than welcome to set up, take the photograph. So, and it was kind of nice because when I looked, you know, she was standing in the doorway and I could see into their house, and you know, she had lots of collections of things in the house. And then I went to the other side, and a younger family lived in that side, and with teenagers who were just coming and going as I was going to the door. And they had completely gutted the inside. It was all very, you know, brand new furnishings, and you could see it was all kind of torn out, the open concept instead of the broken down rooms, they're broken up spaces. And the woman who answered the door on that side rolled her eyes and said, you know, how terrible it was that this other side was the color it was. So, so I was really interested in that split, you know, physically and emotionally with this location. So the idea of history and how it's revealed and how communities come together, or I guess don't come together. I'm really interested. There was one location, and this was, you know, an example of one. There used to be the pool in Leven, and it was an area when it was a booming industrial area, and the community was very lively. People came together to swim at the public swimming pool, and that was quite popular in the 50s and 60s. With the loss of the railway in the community, the decline in industry, that kind of changed. People came together less, but there's still evidence of the pool, which I'm really interested in. You know, so they've kept, this is now a public park, and there's that reference to the pool that was never lost, which I'm really intrigued by. So just that idea to the kind of quiet reference to history that exists. This one is another one. It's on Station Road. So it used to be the train tracks, and then that really intrigued me with the peaked roofs and that kind of repetition that echoes the train tracks and the line that kind of goes down the side of the sidewalk. Past businesses and that kind of history, reinvention of space. So it's all not doom and gloom, but there's a lot of positive things happening, and people reinventing spaces. And just that idea of the barrier, I'm really interested in, the barrier of presenting you with bits of information, but not all of the information. And also the idea of human interaction with the environment. That's actually somebody's lunch there. So this is down in the coast in Buckhaven, and it's actually the original staircase that used to lead to all of the fishing houses and huts that were along the coast, which there are none anymore. So, and I'm just going to give you a quick story about this one in terms of the idea of the everyday and being aware of your surroundings, and how I'm really kind of interested in that and how things kind of come together nicely. When I was setting up for this one, and I should mention that the idea of using the large format view camera, is not only appealing in terms of the aesthetics that I'm able to achieve with it, but I'm also really intrigued by the whole process in terms of forces me to slow down. I become much more familiar with the community. So instead of just wandering and photographing, for me to make a connection to the place is really important. So that allows me to just kind of work away, and at each spot I can be anywhere from 10 to 40 minutes making a photograph. So this one, I made a few images in the area. And when I was setting up, the other thing is you get to talk to a lot of people because people are curious. And you don't see a lot of those kinds of cameras around anymore, so it kind of facilitates dialogue with strangers, which is usually good. So in this case, this man was walking past and he asked what I was doing. I told him a bit about what I was working on and things that were kind of interesting to me. And I was just packing up about 45 minutes later. He was on his way to get his lunch, and he was headed back to work when I was packing up. And he said, "I'm so glad that you're here, because I just had the most amazing walk to the place that I always go to every day." He's like, "I saw so many things so differently after talking to you." And he was 15 minutes late coming back. So it was really kind of an interesting dialogue to have with somebody. And just to kind of, it made me feel nice that I could make him see something that's so familiar to him in a very fresh way. So that's that. I'll just leave that to you. So I guess like the kind of layers that exist are really interesting. So I find interesting, as I mentioned before, and the remnants, and kind of, the regrowth in this case, so the grass coming up, regeneration of space and other images. So another body of work that I did in 2007 to 2008. It's titled Memento, and it deals with the idea of saving hair, or the practice of saving hair. I don't save hair, but I find the practice of saving hair very intriguing. And it just happened that I had come across my grandmother's hair in an envelope at my house, another time, and it just made me kind of think about it. And then I just started asking around, if people had hair that they have saved, and I know there's some people in the audience that I photographed their hair. Each work is 4 by 5 inches, and it's a contact print using a printing out paper. So it's a process that uses the sun to expose the paper instead of the darkroom. So kind of a lead-in to alternate process. So I'm kind of, again, interested in the idea of the absence and the presence. So the hair, it's an extension of the body, and I should mention each one is titled by the person who the hair belonged to. So this is Leona Eshelumar, Catherine, this is my grandmother, Madeline. So that idea of how your hair is an extension of the body, and the cultural, goes back very far in history, the practice of saving hair and different cultural reasons for doing so. And for me, I just am really interested in that idea of the presence and the absence. So you have a part of somebody, and maybe it represents just a memory, or maybe it's somebody who's passed away, or maybe it's just somebody who doesn't want to throw out their hair, which is this person, Zach. So he had jars of his hair for a certain period of time. So I just dumped out one of the jars, and I thought it looked kind of like a piece of hairy toast. So I guess with this, it kind of was leading me into more alternative process ways of making photographic work. So raw wool is another smaller body of work. I just have, I think, 4 slides to show you from this. There's only 9 in the series. And with this, I made this in 2012. And the raw wool is wool that I collected while I was in Scotland, so from 2009 up until 2012. So as I would travel around Scotland, if any of you have been to the UK, you'll know that the roads are quite narrow, and there are a lot of sheep and lots of traffic. So in some cases, I would pass by places that there would be a lot of wool that, it was a place that I was really interested in, and that I started collecting the wool. And other places I just couldn't stop. So it's kind of places that are significant to me. So I'm really interested in the idea of collections. So the memento kind of led me to this body of work and why people collect things. And, how a collection to some people can be very valuable. And for me, this is valuable in the sense that they represent an emotional connection to a place, that there's a lot of memories tied in with each sample of wool. And to somebody who might find my collection, it's like, some wool. Gay, you'd probably spin it and make something beautiful. It's just that idea of collections and the personal collection. So this one is Derveg, near Derveg. So each one is named after where it is in location or close to. So maybe just on the outskirts of a community. Each one is using the wet plate collodion process, which Lucy spoke of in her introduction, and I'll kind of explain that a little bit more in a few minutes. But the process that I used in terms of the aesthetics, I'm really drawn to the rawness of the way that the image quality, and how it creates kind of this lack of sense of space. That the wool is just kind of existing in this nondescript space. That there's kind of an obscurity of environment and a little bit of maybe whimsical mixed in. So this one is Craignier. Basically, I would just collect them, put them in baggies, label them, and sometimes there's dirt and bits of things in them, and that's how they stay. This is Campbelltown, and Auclaris. I'm not very good at pronouncing that last one. So with the wet plate collodion, it's a process that began or was invented in the 1850s, and as its name suggests, things have to be wet while working. So in saying that, you need to have access to a darkroom and studio to do the whole process from start to finish. So the raw wool was a body of work that I was able to do in the studio, and so I had access to one location, and everything was very controlled. But then I really wanted to kind of get out and experience different places, but with this same process. So after some research, this is what I use now as my darkroom. It's a converted ice fishing tent into a darkroom. I'm not really a camper, so tents, not really my thing. So there was a struggle in the beginning. But it is very functional, and I almost have it down to a system with a few surprises every now and again. But inside, this is my setup, and I'm just showing you this so you get a sense of the process and how that's reflected in the images. So in here, I have all of my chemicals that I need and my materials. So it's something that you need to plan for when you go out making work. Wet plate collodion. Collodion is material that initially was used in Civil War times in the medical field. So if you had a wound, collodion would be put on either side of that wound, and it was like the pre-Band-Aid, basically. So it was a bonding agent. So your bandage would stick onto your skin. So I'm going to give you a very brief introduction as to the process. Basically, you have your collodion, the bonding agent, poured onto a surface. So that can be glass or tin. And the glass gives you the negatives, which I use to make the raw wool. And it can also give you produce ambrotypes, and tintypes, which, if any of you have seen old photographs, maybe at flea markets or in museums of ambrotypes, just a lot of them were portraits of people on glass, and they came in these beautiful little kind of folding cases. And tintypes, much more durable, many more lasted through the years because they're tin. So you have your bonding agent is poured on. It's then sensitized in silver nitrate or a silver bath. So a lot of the things that happen are kind of similar to film. There's silver in film that makes it light sensitive. That's put into a plate holder, which is basically like a film holder for a view camera. And then into your camera, and you can make the exposure. So all of this needs to be done while it's wet. If it starts to dry, it's no longer light sensitive. So if you think back to the 1850s, it's, a lot of gear to travel with and a very different way of working. But I'll get to more of that in a moment, I guess. So once it's exposed, then you go back in your darkroom and you develop it. Everything's done by hand, so it kind of introduces that element of chance. So again, I'm kind of going back to the balance of using tools that are very precision-based with a process that is very kind of weighted in chance and a little bit of unpredictability, and very much reference to the artist's hand. So once it's developed, then it's just fixed, so it's no longer light sensitive, and then it's your glass negative. So this is the scene that I was photographing. Edges, how they're kind of lost, there's lots of different things. I won't go into great detail over what happens, but a lot of it, can be because of developing, how things are poured on the plate, and in this particular case, a lot of environmental issues in terms of the cold weather. So the idea of the traveling tintype studio in the 1850s was something really appealing to me. And you begin to see in history a lot more photographs of everyday people, that it's no longer just wealthy individuals and special events that are being recorded. So you're now using materials that are much cheaper. There's a lot more people doing it, and they're going out and photographing a lot more of communities and different locations. So for me, the idea with the tintype is that it's a different way of connecting with a place. That before using this process, I didn't really find a connection to making portraits. But now that the element of time is introduced into the still image, and all of those other elements of the aesthetics that I was speaking of are really of interest to me. So I'm just going to show you a few portraits of friends and family as kind of like an ongoing body of work that I do. Each of these are 8 by 10 inches. When the wet plate process is on tin, it's like a one-off. So there's just the one, and it's not something that you can make multiples of, so it's unique. You'll notice that as I'm going through these, there's slight variations in the color. Again, that kind of goes back to the chemicals that I'm using and environmental things that are happening. So each of these are titled by their names. So I think we had Theo and Matt, Melissa, Inga, and this is my brother, Chris. So that. Okay, so this one is Theo. This is about 20. This one was 23 seconds. Matt held very still. He was 18 seconds. Melissa was about 25 seconds. I lied to her and told her it was going to be 12 seconds. So there's a certain kind of intensity that I find is revealed with a lot of these portraits because people are really concentrating on staying still. And I'm really drawn to that, not only just the aesthetics, but that kind of emotional quality that I get when I'm making the tintype portraits. Inga, 12. And my brother was another 20-some. So that idea of connecting with place in a very different way was something that was intriguing to me. When I went to Iceland this summer, I was there for almost 6 weeks. And, I'd be traveling around and going to these places that were very unique to me, and thinking about how I was connecting with those places. So with these, I did this small series, there's 9 of them, of self-portraits, which was also something kind of different for me, where it's me in the landscape or the environment, and then I don't change anything in terms of point of focus, but I just remove myself. So each one is kind of a pairing of being in the landscape and then removed from. So again, that absence and presence. This is in a geothermal area, So it's just steam. I thought maybe I ruined the one on the right, but it was just really steamy. So again, connecting to place. So I went to a lot. I did a lot of exploring when I was there. I just drive to the middle of nowhere, which really, if you've ever been to Iceland, doesn't take too long to get to. And I was pretty much isolated when I'd be there. There was nobody around for most of the work that I did, which was pretty interesting. And it allowed me to kind of go back to all of those things that I was speaking of before in terms of connecting to place. But then I wanted to go back and connect in a different way. So over 4 weeks, about 3 or 4 times each week, I would go to Natalsvik Beach. And beach culture there is very different than here. It's a place of gathering and a community and doing different activities and kind of, it's not sunbathing and playing volleyball for the most part. So it wasn't a tourist destination, which is what I was interested in. It was accessible to me and very much community-based. So I began to set up and make portraits of people in the community. This process has been inspired by those traveling tintype studios and going to communities and recording them or photographing them and interacting with them. The big red tent and my camera makes me kind of a spectacle in a way, so it again facilitates dialogue. So I had these little descriptions done up in Icelandic as well as in English for people to read about what I was up to, because some people didn't speak English and other people were quite fluent in English. So it was, a lot of different people that I would meet. The really wonderful thing about doing this body of work was that it enabled me to make connections with a place in a very different way. A lot of the people I saw numerous times, and they'd come and talk and hear a lot of stories about this area. So it was really a wonderful experience. So there's 34 in total, and each one of these is titled by the name of the person in the image. They're all 4 by 5 inch tintypes. I can't pronounce 90% of their names, so I'm just going to show you. And some of these people, like this Bent, the man on the right-hand side, that's somebody who I still keep in contact with. So it's not only a short-term relationship that I built by doing this with some of these people, but others are long-term that I'm back and forth with. So it's quite nice. I think the other thing that happens with this, as I was working through it, is when I was going back and looking at older photographs, tintypes and ambrotypes, you kind of really see why people looked the way they did. They're holding the pose, and it's not because all of our relatives were grouchy and upset. So there's an intensity that begins to happen that I really enjoy. And I really didn't offer any guidance as to how people should come together or if they wanted to be by themselves. So I found the body language and how people kind of group themselves was really interesting as well. So in addition to photographing the people at Natalsvik Beach, I was also doing environmental kind of landscape, built environment shots. And the idea of the human interaction with the landscape. So although the first time I went to Iceland was in 2008, and I, had this naive kind of idea of there was so much untouched landscape, but really, a lot of it has been seen and explored. So I was really interested in the idea of that human interaction with the landscape and evidence of that. So I just have a few images of that. So these are geothermal, like kind of transport pipes, basically. So they're kind of all scattered in the landscape. They're quite beautiful. A nice contrast with the landscape. So I just have 3 slides left, and I just wanted to kind of bring it back to what I'm up to next. So this is a portrait, part of that other series, a tintype of Jamie, husband Jamie. And this one was taken when it was about minus 20 degrees, and the exposure was 22 seconds. And with this image, the environmental conditions were starting to be revealed in the image. So in saying that, I mean the kind of dots that are appearing on the side of his face and down the center of the image. There's other things that are happening on the image surface itself that I'm really interested in, and how the conditions that I'm working in can be revealed physically in an image. So I know a lot of you are excited for spring, but I'm super excited it's still wintry out. Because I'm interested in exploring the how those conditions are revealed in the image. The harshness of the landscape, the harshness of the temperature, the wind, and all of that, how that can be physically represented on the plate. So for example, you get things like cracking. Chemistry doesn't work the way it should. So there's that idea of chance that's really starting to come back in. And again, kind of going right back to the beginning, growing up in Newfoundland, long winters, and that cold wind that I guess a lot of people in Sackville are familiar with as well, and how that can be revealed in the photograph. So in this one on the top left, you can kind of see how it's actually starting to crack. So just the idea of forcing that, pushing it a little bit more, maybe not being as efficient as I could be. So I'm just trying to see how far I can push it, still make a photograph that I'm really interested in, and that is kind of communicating all of those ideas of the landscape and the harshness. So the end of this winter and into next winter, those are kind of ideas that I'm working with. So I will end on that one, and is there any questions, I guess? Oh, that's a good question. So that was one of the things in the write-up. In the people that I didn't know for that body of work, that was actually, I have all the tintypes, and in return for them helping me out or sitting for me, participating in this project, that I scanned each of the tintypes and sent them a high-resolution digital file of it. So there were, some people who I got to know a bit more, and I made them another portrait in return for their generosity of their time. So whereas the 8x10 ones of people I know, I generally make 2, and I keep one and they have one. Mm-hmm. not including setup and everything, it probably around 10 to 15 minutes. Yeah. So, I mean, I showed you the first part of what kind of happens of the processing. And then after that, I come back and I wash the plates and varnish them, and then they're ready to either be used as negatives or a tintype that somebody could handle. So I just keep them, as long as they're kept wet, they're perfectly safe. You know, you could wait a few days to wash them and do those last steps. And people still do, but more commonly in the late 1800s, people would mix honey and water together so that the water wouldn't slosh about, and then they would be kept wet to transport. So. So when I first began that work, I actually shot probably for the first few weeks in both color and black and white. Color initially because there were certain things that I really loved, how color kind of changed the direction of an image and how I was responding to color, because there's a lot of beige, there's a lot of like neutral tones. So I think for me it was kind of it happened, I started using color the day I photographed the yellow bin in the parking lot, the empty parking lot. That's the day I just dropped black and white for that body of work. And then everything just made sense. So I think the use of color and the kind of subtle, I guess it's not all about color for the most of them. They're all shot in primarily overcast settings where there's not a lot of deep shadow, so that everything's quite flat, and then just little pops of color. And the way that I've printed them in terms of printing them digitally, I don't manipulate the image to the point where it's not believable, but I often treat the color with a little bit more attention, if that makes sense. So maybe I push it a little bit further so that it's still accepted as being, you know, realistic or believable, but it's just a little bit higher saturated. So I'm kind of interested in that with the color. Sure. I think a lot of the time if it's just a place that I'm happening upon in terms of like just going somewhere for pleasure, it's a lot of just responding and taking the time to respond. So maybe not necessarily saying I'll come back and revisit it. In a body of work like Disregard, I spent, the body of work is edited down to about 50 images. But there are a lot more that, were part of that. And I spent a lot of time, even when I wasn't shooting, just walking around. And I would do exactly what you said, and I'd actually, make snapshots, and then I'd come back and I'd revisit in different kinds of light, different times of day. I've been asked if anyone actually lives in those places because there's never any people. So, I benefited from long days in terms of daylight for a lot of that work. Sometimes when I'm working on something like that, well, a lot of the time I'll have like a very vague list of things that I'm thinking about. So it might be kind of corners of streets, or certain colors, or certain things that are just kind of vague, maybe triggers of a list that I have, and I kind of go around and wander, and that's maybe like a framework that starts a lot of that work. So does that kind of answer your... It's a lot of wandering, it's a lot of revisiting, but I love doing it, so it's not something that's trying or, that I have to make myself go and do. Mhm.
For a wonderful talk, and thank you for being part of our town.
Thank you. It's been great.